This presentation that you are about to see is a follow-up to my previous video in this series examining world age cycles. In that video, I identified a very special conjunction pattern encoded in various mythical stories and religious texts, one that was extremely destructive to the Earth, confirmed by the geophysical record of the planet. Now in this presentation, I'm going to explain just how planetary alignments themselves can actually trigger earthbound upheaval, including a whole host of rather exotic phenomena in the heavens. Now I will just mention that this work follows on from my book, Occult Physics, which is this here, which deals with the ideal celestial cycles of the planets, including also the careful placement of ancient megalithic structures upon the Earth, including covert military intelligence facilities. Now if you do wish to support my work, I would urge you to visit my website and purchase a copy of my book. It can only be obtained from my website. All copies are, however, personally signed by me. You can also help me by donating money via various cryptocurrencies. The links are in the description box for this. And definitely, if you do like this video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell notification button for further updates. This current presentation then will begin by looking at some of the rather exotic properties of comets. I will then discuss some of the work of Immanuel Velikovsky on the topic of catastrophism, followed by my own views in this area, which do indeed differ significantly from those of Velikovsky. Following this, I will then go on to discuss the actual science behind global upheaval, and also reveal some of the key ancient texts which would appear to encode this science, some of which were only very recently discovered in the modern age. Let us begin then by looking at some of the basic characteristics of comets, in this instance with reference to one only recently discovered just a few decades ago, Comet Hyakutake, first observed in 1996. Now you can see on screen here some of the basic characteristics of the comet, a small rocky body some 2.6 miles in diameter. As it got close to the Sun, the cometary tail that developed around it extended some 360 million miles away from it, an immense distance, some 4 times the mean distance between the Earth and the Sun at some 93 million miles. Now that such small bodies can generate cometary tails so long is a very noteworthy fact. Next, we may consider comet 67P Churyumov-Gerasimenko. Here we may note a close examination of the comet by the Rosetta probe, as launched by the European Space Agency. As imaged here, shortly after sunrise, impressive jets of gas and dust were seen in the happy region of the comet. But just what makes this possible though? Well, as recent scientific advances have shown, comets are not mere dirty snowballs, but bodies that electrically interact with the Sun. To be sure, it is the Sun's light itself striking such bodies, electrically stimulating them, that forces them to cast off their material into space, such effects being in addition to the general formation of cometary tails as they get close to the Sun. In another image of the same comet, an extremely powerful short-lived outburst of material was captured. This was taken from a distance of 186 kilometers from the center of the comet, with the jet estimated to have had a minimum speed of 10 meters per second. What is essentially happening here then is the formation of powerful electromagnetic hotspots upon the comet's surface, blasting off its material into space, easily overcoming the force of gravity. To be sure, electromagnetic forces are well known to be vastly more powerful than gravitational forces. Moving on still further, one may consider next comet P17 Holmes, a small object some 2.2 miles in diameter, orbiting the Sun within the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter. On the 24th of October 2007, Comet Holmes shocked astronomers with a spectacular eruption. In less than 24 hours, the 17th magnitude comet brightened by a factor of nearly 1 million, becoming a naked eye object in the evening sky. By mid-November, the expanding comet was the largest object in the solar system, bigger even than the Sun. Now since then, the comet has faded back to invisibility. So what happened? Due to a huge spike in the solar wind, it was subject to a surge of charged particles from the Sun, and it is this electrical effect that resulted in its suddenly flaring up, developing an expanding, glowing spherical halo about itself. Now with such exotic cometary effects noted, we may next turn to the work of Immanuel Velikovsky and his classic book Worlds in Collision, first published in 1950. In studying very carefully the ancient mythological stories of the past, Velikovsky concluded that they encoded real-world accounts of great celestial upheaval within the solar system. Here one may note the following summary of his work, in the words of David Talbot. At the heart of Velikovsky's controversial thesis was a seemingly outrageous idea. He claimed that planets, moving on quite different courses than observed today, formerly disturbed the motions of the Earth and caused great destruction to ancient nations. These extraordinary events, Velikovsky claimed, are recorded in ancient chronicles, myths, and rites around the world, sources that are simply incomprehensible in terms of celestial motions today. Velikovsky contended that the planet Venus, just a few thousand years ago, possessed a spectacular comet-like tail, and its orbit intersected that of the Earth. Though Velikovsky's interest in the subject began with a reading of biblical accounts of the Exodus period, the plagues of Egypt, and the spectacles of the wandering in the desert, what led to his startling conclusions was a thorough cross-referencing with global myths of disaster, stories in which the agent of catastrophe takes the form of a great comet or flaming dragon, a body consistently identified with the planet Venus. Velikovsky also argued that the planet Mars, in the 8th and 7th centuries before the present era, moved on an erratic course, disrupting the Earth. Celestial upheavals caused by the unstable movements of Mars, according to Velikovsky, are the true reason why Mars appears in ancient records as a great god of war, shaking the heavens and producing general pestilence and devastation. Now, in introducing some of Velikovsky's theories by way of Talbot's article, I do wish to state here that I myself am not in agreement with him on several key points. To begin with, I do not believe that any of the major planets have suffered radical alterations to their orbits in the manner Velikovsky describes, most notably with regard to Venus or Mars. To my mind, it is not necessary for the planets to get close to one another in order for them to suffer extreme geophysical effects, either by way of gravity or electrical means. It is my own contention that the orbits of the planets have been exceptionally stable over the course of time, as modelled backwards using modern-day astronomical software. Velikovsky also held to the view that the planet Venus was a recent entrant to our solar system, only arriving a few thousand years ago, initially as a giant comet with a large tail, before finally settling down to establish itself as a planet. Now I myself do not hold to this at all. My own view concerning past global upheaval is that such events are periodically triggered by special types of conjunctions, and that they temporarily ignite the inner planets, most notably Mercury and Venus, to develop cometary properties. In this regard, one may consider Venus by way of example. Imagine a special alignment of the planets energetically stimulating it to develop cometary properties, including a large tail. Now, as cometary tails always point away from the Sun, upon conjunction with our planet, the Earth has the potential to pass through it, were it of sufficient length and strength, thereby producing what might be devastating earthbound effects. When one considers that comet Hyakutake, only 2.6 miles in diameter, produced a tail some 360 million miles in length, in noting that the closest approach between the Earth and Venus upon conjunction is only some 26 million miles, the danger would seem all too apparent. More than this, though, one has to consider all of the potential effects associated with small comets, scaled up. Indeed, if a small rocky body can blast off its material by way of electromagnetism via stimulation by the Sun's light, what of a planet? Were Venus itself thus to be stimulated in a similar manner, significant-sized fragments, even several hundred feet in diameter, could well be ejected from its surface and cast off into space, easily overcoming gravitational forces. Were such fragments thus to cross the path of the Earth, crashing into our planet, massive devastation could result. Here then we may note the extreme global upheaval events previously detailed in the last presentation. For 10,964, 7650 and 3153 BC, we had the world age-ending core alignment associated with major meteor or cometary bombardment of the Earth. However, when the alignment was established in 1345 AD, we do not appear to have had large destructive fragments hit us. Rather, we just seem to have been brushed by a cometary tail creating a toxic atmosphere, which resulted in the plague. The alignment that triggered all of these disasters was the same, but the effects were not. Sometimes we just get lucky and avoid getting hit by major fragments. This brings us to the next issue at hand, extreme seismic or geophysical activity, especially noted in the mid-7th millennium BC. On screen here you can see the cover of my own book with the contents listed. In this case I wish to draw your attention to Chapter 9, The Secret Physics of Gravity. In this chapter I present some of the more esoteric theories on gravity that would appear to explain just how the planets are held in their orbits about the Sun. Now, although a full and in-depth examination is not possible here, and you will need to read my book for that, just briefly, there are certain pertinent points to note about gravitational fields that are very relevant to periodic global upheaval. As you can see from the diagram, reproduced from my book, I present a basic section of the core elements of a gravity field. The key point to note is that such fields do not extend away from a given material body in accordance with the gradient of a simple inverse square law, as per the work of Isaac Newton. Rather, gravitational fields are generated by complex rotational forces, usually operative deep within the interior of a given body. As a result, localized gravity wave troughs are generated that extend away from a given primary body. Now, what actually makes this possible is the fact that space itself has resistance. Consider the Sun itself by way of example. From the work of various Russian and American physicists, it has been found that the Sun continuously changes its volume, and that the Sun's surface rises and falls by about 10,000 meters just like a pump motion, with a cycle of 160 minutes, and this is in addition to its rotational motion. As a result of this type of dynamic action, the Sun pushes space out away from itself, creating a distinctive waveform pattern. Due to the resistance of material space itself, however, the Sun's waves eventually reach a maximum compression point, far away from the body. At this point, the waves then rebound and reflect back. The outgoing waves thus interact with the incoming reflecting waves, creating a series of standing waves, i.e., localized troughs with gradients of differing space density. All of the planets orbiting the Sun must orbit within these troughs, as established, what are in effect local gravity wells. They cannot orbit at just any arbitrary distance from the Sun. How does this relate, though, to periodic global upheaval? Well, quite simply. When certain special conjunction patterns are established in the heavens, they can temporarily interfere with the Sun's ability to maintain a stable gravitational field. In other words, the standing wave patterns as actively generated by the Sun are disrupted, causing all of the planets within the solar system to simultaneously become agitated in their orbits, being subject to significant geophysical stresses. Now, this indeed would explain the character of the destruction that the Earth was subjected to in the mid-7th millennium BC. In this instance, extreme flooding and volcanic activity, caused by physical stresses to the planet. In this regard, one may actually point to a classic quotation from the 4th century BC Chaldean named Berossus, who was a priest of Bel, or Marduk. Being rather familiar with the esoteric sciences, he himself readily understood just how conjunction patterns could account for destruction by both fire and water. Cited by the Roman Seneca circa 2000 years ago, we have the following. Berossus, who interpreted the prophecies of Bel, attributes these disasters, the end of the world and its aftermath, to the movements of the planets. He is so certain of this that he can determine a date for the conflagration and the Great Flood. He maintains that the Earth will burn whenever all the planets, which now have different orbits, converge in Cancer and are so arranged in the same path that a straight line can pass through all their orbs, and that there will be a further Great Flood when the same planets so converge in Capricorn. For under the sign of Cancer occurs the change to summer, under Capricorn the change to winter. They are signs of great power, occurring when there are movements in the change of season. Now one can readily see then just how the Earth can be devastated by fire and water via planetary alignments. Extreme flooding caused by global geophysical stress due to turbulence in the Sun's gravity waves that maintain the Earth's orbit. Destruction of the Earth by fire due to the inner planets developing cometary tails, which the Earth then passes through. To further these points, one may turn next to a collection of early Christian Gnostic texts discovered near the upper Egyptian town of Nag Hammadi in 1945, texts which have significantly influenced modern scholarship of early Christianity and Gnosticism. It was in this year then that 13 leather-bound papyrus codices buried in a sealed jar were found by a local farmer named Muhammad al-Saman. The writings in these codices comprise 52 mostly Gnostic treatises, but they also include 3 works belonging to the Corpus Hermeticum and a partial translation of Plato's Republic. Now, according to scholars, the texts themselves date to the 4th century AD, having been buried since that time right up until when they were rediscovered in 1945. One particular manuscript within the Nag Hammadi library, of great relevance here, is called On the Origin of the World, a Gnostic work dealing with creation and the end times. A most notable passage is shown on screen, one that has many parallels to certain passages in the Gospels in the canonical Bible. Before the consummation of the age, the whole place will shake with great thundering. Then the rulers will be sad, the angels will mourn for their mankind, and the demons will weep over their seasons, and their mankind will wail and scream at their death. Then the age will begin, and they will be disturbed. Their kings will be intoxicated by the fiery sword, and they will wage war against one another, so that the earth will be intoxicated with bloodshed, and the seas will be disturbed by those wars. Then the sun will become dark, and the moon will cause its light to cease. The stars of the sky will cancel their circuits, and a great clap of thunder will come out of the force that is above all the forces of chaos. Here then, the whole place shaking with great thundering refers to the cosmic framework itself being disturbed, that is to say, the celestial bodies of the heavens, including the earth, something that would appear to coincide with the stars of the sky cancelling their circuits. Now in this instance, the reference is to the wandering stars, which is how the ancients referred to the other planets within the solar system, as distinct from the fixed or background stars. Cancelling their circuits, though, is a most curious term, one that hints at a profound esoteric truth, that resonance itself, as a physical process, is operative within the heavens. Now the ancients well accepted that all of the planets propagate their own unique sound signature, hence the term music of the spheres. To be sure, it is not just the sun that establishes a gravity wave pattern around itself. All of the planets do, even in accordance with pulsating rotational forces operative deep within their interiors, even beyond any rocky exterior. When certain special planetary alignments are thus established at the end of a world-age cycle, the gravitational waveform patterns of the planets, their music so to speak, interact to achieve resonant agitation, and it is this which actually triggers geophysical disruption throughout the solar system, and what constitutes the planets cancelling their circuits. More than this though, at such times the sun itself may undergo a most peculiar process, the cancellation of its light waves, causing it to temporarily go dark. To understand more about this process, we turn next to another Gnostic text, known as the Pistis Sophia. Discovered in the modern age in 1773, scholars have dated this work to the 3rd century AD, yet another case of an ancient manuscript dated to antiquity, which was apparently lost for over 1,000 years before being rediscovered almost by accident. Now the manuscript in question records certain secret teachings of Jesus not contained within the canonical Bible, essentially private conversations between Jesus and his main disciples, including also his mother Mary, Mary Magdalene, and Martha. In a certain section of the book, Jesus discusses all of the regions of creation extended from the Godhead, the farthest of which is called the outer darkness. This is characterized as the most isolated realm or state of being in existence, being symbolized by a dragon swallowing its own tail. From a physics perspective, this is representative of an energetic waveform self-reflecting upon itself, being trapped in a perpetual loop. Now when we have these special end-of-age alignments, the physical characteristics of the outer darkness would appear to play a role in the disruptive process. One particular passage of the Pistis Sophia is well worth citing in this regard, chapter 131. Mary continued again and said, "My Lord, doth the dragon of the outer darkness come into this world, or doth he not come? The Saviour answered and said unto Mary, When the light of the sun is outside, above the world, he covereth the darkness of the dragon. But if the sun is below the world, then the darkness of the dragon abideth as veiling of the sun, and the breath of the darkness cometh into the world in the form of a smoke in the night. That is, if the sun withdraweth into himself his rays, then indeed the world is not able to endure the darkness of the dragon in its true form, otherwise would it be dissolved and go to ruin with all. Now when the planets align themselves in certain special patterns at the end of a world age, this is when the physical condition characterized by the outer darkness manifests in the world, affecting not just the earth though, but the sun also. To be sure, what this passage from the Pistis Sophia appears to be describing is a situation where the many and varied light waves of the sun develop coherency of their wavelengths, achieving what physicists refer to as destructive interference. Essentially, they cancel themselves out, causing the sun's light itself to fail, and hence for the body to darken. Moreover, on its way to darkening, it may also alter its colour, most especially towards the red end of the visible spectrum. Here then it is worth noting that eyewitnesses in the past have observed all of these effects, as have indeed coincided with certain very special conjunction patterns, and in future presentations precise examples of this will be given. Now there is also one final point to note regarding changes to the sun's light waves: its energy output. The very disruption to its light waves via these special alignments would appear to explain the sudden and long-lasting changes to the temperature of the Earth, as recorded in its geophysical history. In closing here then, one can see in summary all of the effects discussed, each being achieved merely by the planets being aligned in certain special configurations. Firstly, we have the geophysical effects caused by the resonant agitation of the solar system, which may affect all of the planets simultaneously to one degree or another. Such may result in extreme seismic activity planet-wide. In addition to which, the planets may also suffer significant disruption to their axial rotation, briefly speeding up or slowing down erratically before returning to normal. One may include here also a disruption to the orientation of the axes of the planets as well. Then there is the ignition or energetic activation of the inner planets to develop cometary properties, most notably Mercury and Venus. Effects here may include long cometary tails temporarily established. Also, significant chunks of matter blasted off into space from electromagnetic hotspots that develop on the surface of the bodies. Next, there are the changes to the sun. Its light waves develop coherency and via destructive interference cancel one another out. This may cause the sun itself to go dark or change colour, its light waves shifting outside of the visible spectrum. Finally, we may note that the energy output of the sun may also be affected, being suddenly increased or decreased quite significantly, an effect that may be quite long-lasting. Now, with regard to all of these changes, it is important to note that none of them required a radical alteration to the orbits of the planets, as per the theories of Velikovsky. With respect to the listed effects, the planets do suffer agitation and disruption, but essentially remain intact, with their orbital paths and periods not being fundamentally transformed. World age cycles are thus intimately tied into special conjunction patterns, such patterns marking the transition points between different world ages, usually triggering extreme geophysical upheaval, including a variety of exotic effects in the heavens. In future presentations, I am going to reveal some of the precise dates of these alignments, including screenshots of them, and reveal some of the rather esoteric calendar systems used by the ancients to actually forecast them centuries or even millennia in advance. Now, in ending here, I will of course remind you that if you wish to support my work, please go to my website, Occult Physics. The link is in the description box, and also if you wish, purchase a copy of my book of the same name. And also, to see further videos in this series, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell notification button to receive further updates. For now though, we will leave it there.